This is truly a sad day for Japan. Former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was unconscious and unresponsive after he was shot in the chest during a political event in the western city of Nara this Friday. He was later confirmed dead. Shinzo Abe was undoubtedly one of Japan's most powerful men. Even after stepping down after his 8 years of reign as Japan's longest-serving prime minister, he is said to have held the most power of Japan's biggest political party, the Liberal Democratic Party of Japan, or LDP. The shooting of Shinzo Abe has shocked Japan, which has one of the lowest rates of gun crimes in the world due to its extremely strict gun control laws. In 2018, Japan only recorded 9 deaths from firearms, compared with 39,740 deaths that year in the United States. However sad this is, we must discuss what might happen for Japan next. I want to emphasize that these are my educated guesses, and nothing I write or say here should be taken as advice. First off, there's an election this Sunday for seats in the Japanese parliament. And even before this tragic event, it was quite clear that the LDP was gonna take the absolute most seats. They have been ruling basically without interruption since the end of World War II. And there are other opposition parties, but they're very weak and run almost on jokingly sad platforms. The biggest group of opposition parties have formed a coalition and have at points been able to take a lot of power from the LDP, but they again look very weak. However, in recent years, we've seen specific candidates do very well, especially in rural elections, and been able to garner support and time away from LDP. But with Shinzo Abe's tragic death, I sadly think that these candidates will get no room for their platforms, and LDP candidates will likely win in these areas too. I think in the short run, a super decisive LDP victory will likely boost the Japanese stock markets. However, in the long run, we might see a party that is as secure and as stagnant as they have been for the past 30 years. A party that doesn't feel threatened and doesn't want to rock the boat with major reforms, which are very needed in the Japanese society today. Secondly, I think we'll see the Japanese yen strengthen because the Japanese yen immediately after the news of Shinzo Abe's death have rallied against the US dollar. And it actually has lost over 30% to the US dollar this year due to the Bank of Japan's very relaxed fiscal policy. But the yen has always been considered one of the safe haven currencies, along with the Swiss franc, the euro, and of course the US dollar. And I think that the turbulence we'll see after his death will rally, especially Japanese people, to the Japanese yen. So even with a relaxed Bank of Japan policy, I think we'll still see the yen rise from its previous lows. Thirdly, and this is truly speculation, but I think we'll see an end to the Bank of Japan's doping of the Japanese stock market and depreciation of the yen. Because even though Shinzo Abe hasn't been prime minister for some years now, he has had enormous sway over his party. It is also true that he was the biggest proponent of loose fiscal policies with negative interest rates and an enormous rate of Japanese bonds and stock buybacks that has propped up the Japanese stock markets to ever new heights. In fact, Shinzo Abe appointed the head of the Bank of Japan, Kuroda Haruhiko, who has enacted all these policies. However, the present Prime Minister, Fumio Kishida, is in a completely different faction in the LDP, a faction that promotes decreasing income disparities by raising taxes and improving social welfare. And so even though the Bank of Japan is independent from the Japanese government, as it is set up, it is clear that the government has enormous power to define BOJ's policies. Hence, it is quite likely that Kuroda will be replaced by a much less aggressive leader who adapts BOJ's policies in line with central banks in the West, which would equal substantially higher interest rates and an end to stocks and bond buybacks, which will likely make the Japanese stock market fall, and in turn, a far stronger Japanese yen. Lastly, I think we'll see even stricter weapon laws for Japan, but possibly not in the way you'd think. We still don't know much about the shooter, but he appears to have had shot Shinzo Abe with a handmade shotgun. There will absolutely be a public outcry for the government to make sure something like this never happens again. But in a country with one of the world's strictest gun laws in place already, it is hard for the government to further ban guns. Hence, we will likely see some minor changes to the gun laws that makes it even harder for any private citizens to obtain a gun of any sort. But it will likely not change the amount of gun holders in the country, as it's already so few. However, we might see bans on materials and tools that can be used to create a gun, such as specific 3D printers, chemicals, etc. This will likely not decrease violence in an already very unviolent country, but it actually could hurt people in those industries who are working with these technologies for all kinds of other things. Again, I want to emphasize that nobody knows what will happen now, but this is a momentous moment for Japan and a time when the Japanese people are truly mourning. It could be a moment where things change for the better, where policymakers enact more policies faster and actually tries to make a change. But in all likelihood, from what I can see at least, I think this will hurt the Japanese economy. But in the end, I think Japan will move on from this, and the consequences of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe being dead and disappearing and leaving a massive vacuum in the LDP will likely lead to someone with similar views filling his shoes. So even though it's a shocking moment today, I do not think that there's any alarms for changing your positions in the Japanese stock market, etc. Because the fundamentals are still there and the Japanese stock market still looks very undervalued. Thank you so much for listening and have a blessed day. Goodbye.